Hello my friends, welcome to my channel, Lindy's Magpie Reads, and this is another Friday Reads where I talk about what I've been reading recently. If you're new here, I'm Lindy. I read a lot, pretty much a book a day. So I've got 7 books to tell you about today, and 6 of them are about immigrants or refugees. 2 of them are by Muslim authors, 2 of them are memoirs, 2 of them are interconnected short stories, and 2 of them are in audiobook. And I'm going to jump right in to tell you about an audiobook. It is by the Canadian author Vincent Lam. It's called On the Ravine. In addition to being an award-winning author, one of the prizes that he's won has been the Scotiabank Giller Prize for bloodletting and other cures. That was in 2006. Vincent Lam is a Chinese Canadian whose parents came from Vietnam, and he is also a physician. Just like one of the main characters in this novel, who is a doctor who works in an addiction clinic. So that character Chen in the audiobook is read by the author. Then there's an alternating narrative from the viewpoint of Claire, who is a violinist, and she had a shoulder injury and ended up getting addicted to opioids, so she starts seeing Chen. This story is told with such compassion, and I feel like I really got to know individuals on both sides of this illicit drug crisis that's going on right now. Next up is another Canadian author, Catherine Hernandez, and her new novel, The Story of Us. Her previous novels include Scarborough and Crosshairs. This one is about a Filipino foreign domestic worker, Mary Grace, who goes by MG. Catherine Hernandez's background is also Filipino, combined with Chinese, Spanish, and Indian. We get to know Mary Grace and her situation in the Philippines and why she decides to take a job overseas. She starts out in Hong Kong working as a nanny, and later on ends up in Canada as a nanny, and then later on working in elder care. And the woman she cares for is a trans woman. MG just has so many struggles, and they ring true, so realistic for people like her who are taken advantage of all over the world, foreign workers. And I love the way that by the end of this book, MG has found a home in Toronto, a sense of belonging with great community support around her, including a lot of queer characters. The one thing that didn't work as well for me in this is that it is in the voice of MG's baby. This design on the cover that looks like sort of Russian nesting dolls is alluded to in the novel because the baby remembers being inside the grandmother when the grandmother was pregnant with the baby's mother, MG. And there's the idea of eggs within a developing fetus and that interconnection. But yeah, the baby was maybe a bit too cutesy for me. I think it would work better for other readers. I can give you a sample Hello. Holy moly, was that ever a good nap? I don't want to brag or anything because I understand that sleep gets progressively crappy as we age, but wow, that was restorative. I think I grew a little. What do you think? Does this onesie look tight on me now? Have my cheeks gotten fuller? I feel fuller. The Story of Us, Catherine Hernandez. Next up, I have a picture book. It's called Zahra's Blessing, a Ramadan story. Ramadan started this year, just this week, and it will go for a month. And at the end, there's the celebration of Eid. There are two creators. The author is Shirin Shamsi, and the illustrator is Manal Mirza. Both of these women are Pakistani Americans. It's a story of a little girl whose greatest desire is to have a sister. She helps her mother volunteering at a refugee shelter, meets a girl that she gets along with really well, and her family ends up fostering this orphaned refugee. It's such a sweet story, and for children who are Muslim, I think it's just great that there's a story set during Ramadan, and I think it's equally interesting for non-Muslim children, so it could be either a mirror or a window. And the art, I've just got to say, I love Mirza's art. I don't usually care for digital art. It's my least favorite style, but those dots in there are just, oh, it's that combination of whimsy, I guess, and the bright colors and those dots. Just love the dots. And there are notes at the back as well that explain Ramadan and fasting and displacement and foster care. Next up is the memoir Ma and Me by Putsata Reang. Reang was only a year old when her parents escaped from Cambodia when the war started there in 1975. They were on a ship that was designed to have 28 people on it, and more than 300 refugees escaped on this ship, riding very low in the water. There was hardly room for anyone to move. They were on this boat for a month, and Putsata nearly died. The captain, in fact, thought the mother should throw her overboard, thinking that this baby was already dead. And then when they got to the Philippines, she was in the hospital for quite a while until she recovered. Their family settles in rural Oregon, where every summer the entire family spends picking fruit in the fields, berries of all kinds mostly. She grows up to be a lesbian, but this causes a rift between her and her mom. They had always been really close. Reang becomes a journalist. She goes to work in Cambodia, and her writing just kept me captivated throughout. I could really feel her conflicted emotions about whether she was Cambodian or American, and how much she owed her parents for saving her, and her fear also of being rejected by her parents if she came out as gay. So there was a lot of emotion there as well. It's really, really good. 5 stars. My lesbian book club is going to be discussing this on Monday. we have had a whole bunch of great books on our lineup. So I will link the book club below in case any of you want to follow us on Instagram. Next up is another memoir, and it is also in audio. It's called Free, A Child in a Country at the End of History. It's by Lea Ypi. Ypi grew up in Albania, and when she was still a child, everything changed when the country's totalitarian system fell and capitalism took over in Albania, and then civil war after that. But that moment of those few years before and during this momentous change going on was really eye-opening. She has a really engaging style. She says, "In my family, everyone had a favorite revolution, just as everyone had a favorite summer fruit. My mother's favorite fruit was watermelon, and her favorite revolution was the English one. Mine were figs and Russian. My father emphasized that he was sympathetic to all our revolutions, but his favorite was the one that had yet to take place. As to his favorite fruit, it was quince, but it could choke you when it wasn't fully ripe, so he was reluctant to indulge. Dates were my grandmother's favorite fruit. They were hard to find, but she had enjoyed them when she was little. Her favorite revolution was, of course, the French one." So when Ypi is little, she has no idea that when her parents are talking about relatives going off to university, what they're talking about is spending time in prison. And there was a lot of coded conversation like that because people didn't want to end up at university or worse. It's an absolutely stunning memoir. It is read by Rachel Babbage with the afterword or epilogue read by the author in the audio edition. I really like this. So that's 2 5-star memoirs in a row. Next, I have a collection of interconnected short stories called Jollof Rice and Other Revolutions. It's by Omolola, Ijeoma, Ogunyemi, who is a Nigerian author now living in the United States. The span of these stories is about 150 years, even though they center on 4 girls who met at boarding school and became really close friends there. This is the high school in rural Nigeria. But the first story is about the grandmother of one of these girls who is married to a woman. I had heard about these kinds of marriages between women happening in some African countries when I read Before We Were Trans by Kit Hayam, which I talked about in a previous video. But let's get back to Jollof Rice. Each story stands really well on its own, and yet together it's like, a greater whole. It really does form a novel, and the setting changes back and forth between Nigeria, the United States. One story is set in Poland. The girls grew up to be kind of middle-class women, and it goes right into the future, the year 2050. That actually might be my very favorite story. There's just so much imagination and vibrant life in these stories, but they also touch on important issues like colonialism, police brutality, drug addiction, the healthcare system. It's amazing, amazing. And the last book that I'm going to tell you about, my favorite of all 7 of these, is Thank You, Mr. Nixon by Gish. Another collection of interconnected short stories. This one has about a 50-year time span because it starts in 1972 when Richard Nixon visits China, and it ends in 2002 during the COVID pandemic lockdown. Here's a sample from the first story. Dear Mr. Nixon, I don't know if you'll remember me, especially now that I am in heaven and you are in hell. I was one of the little girls you talked to when you came in 1972. Do you remember? Not the one in the famous picture. I was the other one. I just love I love the people in these stories. I loved the dialogue. I loved the humor. I loved how I could really identify with a whole bunch of different situations, and there was serendipitous delight as well, because when a tour group from the US is in China, when it's around the time when it was first opened up to foreigners and people could only go, on bus tours and stuff like that, lots of control over what people saw. This particular group of travelers goes to Hong Kong first, and then they're in Shanghai, and they're comparing how similar the cities are, except that in Hong Kong, when you look across the water, all you see are high-rises, whereas on the Bund in Shanghai, on the other side of the water, it's rice paddies. And I remembered how when I read Larissa Lai's book, The Lost Century, which covers 100 years of Hong Kong history in that novel, I learned that there used to be rice paddies in a valley in Hong Kong, and the British forbade the villagers from growing rice there. So those people ended up in poverty on account of that. Yeah, so those kinds of connections with other books that I've been reading, and because I've been reading so much about immigrants and, so these stories kind of layer on these other books that I've been reading as well. I recently read Václav Havel's The Power of the Powerless, and it comes up in here, a student who is studying it. So, yeah, there was lots of little sort of extra pleasures like that, in addition to this being just so good. It is on the long list for the Carol Shields Prize. I will link more information about that below, but that's the reason why I picked it up. I probably wouldn't have otherwise, so I feel really lucky that I'm paying attention to what's on these award long lists, because wow, I was blown away by this one. Loved it. And that's all I've got to tell you about today. If you've read any of these, I would love to hear your comments down below. I forgot to mention that the memoir Free by Lea Ypi was recommended to me by one of my commenters, Heather Dunlop. So thank you, Heather, for that. More comments, please, all of you. Love to hear from you, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.